On my 58th birthday, I stood at the threshold of my son's house, cake in hand, only to find my seat at the table gone. The chair once marked Mom now bore a shiny placard that read, "Reserved for VIP guests." That guest was not me. He thought he had secured his inheritance. But as I stared at that sign, I decided to rewrite the rules. I did not just leave that night. I vanished. I am Evelyn Carter. And tonight, the day I turned 58, was supposed to be a small victory lap. A widow for over 30 years. I built Valoria North Star Trust from nothing, a fictional residential care and real estate giant in Houston. I was its founder and still its chairman, though my son, Ryan, had been running the daily operations. This evening, my birthday, Ryan had sent a curt, impersonal text, dinner at 7. Don't be late. The invitation felt less like love and more like a required attendance. I pulled up to the enormous, newly renovated house, a sprawling monument to the Benton family's oil money. I carried a bakery box containing a triple-layer chocolate cake in one hand and a carefully wrapped gift in the other, matching knitted scarves for my grandchildren. Emma and Cole. Something I had stayed up for 3 nights to finish. Stepping inside, the air was thick with the scent of money and expensive catering. This was not Ryan's house. It was a Charles Benton showroom. Every detail, from the minimalist art to the heavy velvet drapes, screamed Lily's pedigree. I scanned the walls, which were plastered with family photos, Lily and Ryan in Italy, Lily with her parents, the kids with their grandparents, Charles and Lorraine Benton. I finally found the single photo that included me, tucked away on a shelf near the powder room, facing the wall. No one had even bothered to take it down completely. They just performed a casual, public erasure. Lily, my daughter-in-law, intercepted me near the marble foyer. Her smile was a mask, perfectly calibrated and completely hollow. "Hi, Mrs. Carter," she chirped, the word Mom permanently absent from her vocabulary when company was present. She didn't wait for me to take off my coat. "We're so glad you could make it. Just set your things down over there?" She nodded vaguely towards a utility table near the laundry room door. Then she leaned in conspiratorially, her breath smelling of white wine. "We have some very important guests tonight, so we're keeping things tight. Just grab that folding chair in the corner for now." "Okay." I felt the first cold prickle of humiliation. I set the cake down, the heavy thud sounding louder than I intended. Ryan was predictably nowhere near me. He was anchored firmly at the head of the dining table, a satellite revolving around Charles Benton, Lily's father and the founder of Benton Energy. Ryan was pouring Charles a glass of rare scotch, pulling out his chair, and laughing with forced heartiness at whatever industry joke the old man was telling. Ryan finally glanced up as I approached. He didn't interrupt his conversation with Charles. He gave me a quick, dismissive nod, the kind you give the UPS delivery driver you see every week, then immediately turned back to his father-in-law. "Yes, sir. The Q4 numbers look incredible," Ryan was saying, his voice loud and eager. Then, a small miracle. Emma, my 12-year-old, spotted me and bolted across the room. She was all arms and earnest affection. "Grandma." The embrace was the only real warmth I had felt all evening, but it was quickly, brutally interrupted. Ryan put a hand on Emma's shoulder and gently, but firmly, steered her away from me. "Emma, honey, go sit down. Let Grandma sit over there. Don't bother her right now. Grandpa Charles is tired. We need you right next to him to keep him entertained." Right. He positioned her strategically next to Charles Benton, a trophy to be admired. My gift sat unopened on the utility table. The noise of conversation ebbed as Charles prepared to make a toast. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This is still your family. Evelyn, take your seat. There it was, the heavy oak chair at the very end of the table, exactly where I sat for Thanksgiving. It had a small, hand-painted wooden sign placed proudly on the back, Mom. I started towards it, a tiny sliver of hope that perhaps Ryan had kept some part of the tradition alive. But before I could touch the chair, Ryan was there, moving with sudden, sharp purpose. He didn't look at me. He simply reached out, plucked the Mom sign off the back, and placed it carelessly under the centerpiece. In one fluid motion, he replaced it with a polished brass plaque. It read, "Reserved for Mr. Benton." The silence was suffocating. Lily avoided my gaze, nervously fingering her napkin. Charles Benton beamed, adjusting his tie without noticing the drama he was seated upon. I spoke very quietly, my throat tight. "Ryan, where is my seat?" He finally looked at me, and the indifference in his eyes was a blow, cleaner and harder than any slap. He pointed towards the small, flimsy folding chair Lily had mentioned, tucked away by the pantry door, next to the swinging kitchen entry. "Mom, you retired," he said, his voice flat and perfectly audible. "We need to leave the seats of honor for the people who are building the future of this family. Mr. Benton is our partner. Just pull up that chair there. It'll be fine." The sheer audacity, the deliberate public dismissal of everything I had sacrificed for him, of the fact that the house, the lifestyle, and even the company he was using to impress Charles Benton all began with me took my breath away, my breath. He had not just asked me to step aside, he had declared me irrelevant. The rest of the family, Lily, Charles, even the caterers pretended the exchange had never happened. They raised their glasses, shouting to the future. But I saw it. I saw the quick, frightened glance from Emma, who kept her eyes glued to my face, and the worried frown from Cole, who was old enough to know a public execution when he saw one. As I slowly backed away towards the metal folding chair, I didn't feel rage first. I felt an icy, profound clarity. I was an intruder, a relic, a mistake he wanted to hide next to the cleaning supplies, sitting on that cheap, uncomfortable chair, the clamour of their triumphant toasts ringing in my ears. The realization hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. I was the widow, the founder, the chairman, and the mother. Yet I was utterly, completely an outsider in my own bloodline. The folding chair wasn't just physical, it was a verdict. And in that moment, as I stared at the back of my son's head, where he sat, glowing under the shadow of the real VIP, the decision was made. If he had intentionally forgotten who I was, then I would intentionally make sure he never found me again. The clinking of crystal glasses in the dining room seemed to drift away, replaced by the heavy silence of a memory Evelyn could never quite shake. Her mind wandered back to where it all began, long before the marble floors and silk tablecloths. She had been 27 years old when the police knocked on her door to tell her that Mark was gone, taken by a construction accident that left her with nothing but a pile of debt and a 3-year-old boy. She remembered the weight of those early years. She worked night shifts as a nurse, her feet swelling in cheap white shoes, while spending her days studying management textbooks with gritty eyes. When she founded Valoria North Star Trust, it was not the empire it was today. It was a single, dilapidated building she had mortgaged her soul to acquire. Evelyn did everything herself. She negotiated contracts with vendors who looked down on a young widow, and she spent her weekends on her hands and knees scrubbing the hallway floors because she could not afford a janitor. She did it all for one reason. She wanted Ryan to walk into the admissions office of the most prestigious private university in the state and belong there. She wanted to pay his tuition, $50,000 a year, without him ever knowing the smell of bleach on her hands. Her heart ached with a bittersweet warmth as she recalled his childhood birthdays. It was always just the two of them. She would bake a lopsided chocolate cake, and they would sit at the scratched wooden table in their small apartment. The candlelight would dance in his eyes, and he would look at her with a fierce, protective love. "Mom," he had said once, his mouth smeared with frosting. Someday, I'm going to buy you a whole restaurant just to have your party in. You won't have to cook ever again." But the boy who made that promise began to fade the day he married Lily Benton. Evelyn remembered the wedding clearly. It was a display of wealth that made her dizzy. The Benton family had gifted the newlyweds a house worth $2 million and a luxury convertible. When it was Evelyn's turn, she had stepped forward, her hands trembling, to give Ryan his father's antique watch. It was the only thing of value Mark had left, polished until the gold casing gleamed. Ryan had taken it with a polite smile, slipping it into his pocket without looking at it, his eyes already scanning the room for his father-in-law. When Ryan eventually joined Valoria North Star Trust as a director, Evelyn felt a surge of pride mixed with relief. She slowly handed over the reins, believing she was securing his legacy. She remained the chairwoman on paper, a safety net she thought would always be there. However, she began to notice the subtle shifts in his language. In meetings, he stopped saying "our company" and started saying "my company." Then came the day he walked into her office, closing the door with a click that sounded too final. "Mom," he had said, avoiding her eyes. "We need to talk about the branding. Valoria. It sounds a bit dated. Don't you think I was thinking Benton Carter Holdings? It sounds more corporate, more global. Valoria is my name and your father's name combined," she had whispered, her voice barely steady. "I know, but we have to move forward." He had replied, checking his watch, not the one she gave him, but a flashy new one. The erasure happened slowly after that. He forgot her 65th birthday completely. He stopped bringing the grandchildren to visit, claiming they were too busy with piano lessons and fencing practice. He only appeared at her door when he needed a signature to leverage the company assets for another loan. Always in a rush. Always pressing his phone to his ear to take calls from Lily's father. Evelyn told herself he was just stressed. She made excuses for him until the morning she opened the company website and saw her photograph had been moved to the bottom of the page. The title under her name was no longer chairwoman. It read, Founder Emeritus. He had demoted her without even a conversation. Sitting now on the hard folding chair in the shadow of the kitchen, Evelyn felt the crack in her heart widen. She looked through the doorway at the dining room. Ryan was standing at the head of the table, laughing at something Mr. Benton had said, his face flushed with wine and ambition. He looked so confident, so complete without her. She tried to overlay the image of the little boy who used to hold her hand when he was afraid of the dark, but that ghost was fading. She wondered, with a quiet devastation, exactly when she had ceased to be his mother and become merely an obstacle he had successfully managed to step over. The laughter from the dining room followed Evelyn like a physical weight as she slipped into the hallway. She told the guests she needed to use the restroom, but her steps were quiet and deliberate as she turned left instead of right, heading straight for the small home office Ryan used when he visited. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, cutting off the noise of the celebration. The silence here was not peaceful. It was heavy with the scent of expensive leather and stale ambition. She switched on the desk lamp. The pool of yellow light illuminated a scatter of papers Ryan had carelessly left spread out, arrogant in his certainty that his mother would never pry. Evelyn picked up the glossy presentation folder on top. Her breath hitched, but her hand remained steady. The title on the cover sheet was bold and modern: Benton Care Residences. She flipped the page. There was no mention of Valoria, no mention of North Star. The entire brand identity she had built from nothing was stripped away, replaced by the sterile corporate blue of the Benton family empire. Underneath the branding proposal lay a draft for a stock transfer. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon with the practiced speed of a woman who had read contracts for 40 years. It was a dilution strategy. It outlined a plan to issue new shares to Benton Energy, effectively reducing her 51% controlling interest to a powerless minority stake. This was not just forgetfulness. This was an eviction. Ryan was not merely neglecting her. He was actively preparing to erase her existence from the company history. She saw a printed email peeking out from under a ledger. It was from Ryan to his father-in-law. One sentence seemed to leap off the page and sear itself into her retinas. "Don't worry about the old woman. She's just a figurehead now, and she will sign whatever I put in front of her." The last remaining ember of maternal softness in her chest turned into a cold, hard stone. Evelyn reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She did not tremble. She dialed a number she knew by heart. Harper. Evelyn said the moment the line connected. Her voice was low and devoid of warmth. "Evelyn, it is 9 o'clock on Christmas Eve." Harper Rhodes answered, her voice thick with sleep and confusion. "I know, and I am sorry, but I need to activate the contingency plan, the one we drafted 3 years ago, the Scorched Earth Protocol." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the rustle of bedsheets. "Are you sure once we start this?" "I am sure," Evelyn cut in, her tone sharp as a scalpel. "I want you to prepare the filings by 8 tomorrow morning. Transfer my entire voting block into the Northwind Legacy Foundation, and, Harper, include the exclusion clause we discussed, the one regarding the beneficiary's neglect or intentional denial of family relations. He gets nothing if he cannot prove he has been a son." "Understood," Harper said, her tone shifting to professional alertness. "I will get the team on it." Evelyn ended the call and immediately dialed another number. Miguel Alvarez picked up on the second ring. "Senora Evelyn." "Miguel," she said, glancing at the door to ensure she was still alone. "I need you to log in to the central banking portal, right now." "But the holiday freeze?" "Override it. I want you to revert the authorization protocols on the main operating accounts. Switch it back to dual approval mode, requiring my specific digital key for any transaction over $5,000. And Miguel, lock Ryan's corporate credit line. Mark it as compromised." "Compromised?" Miguel asked, his voice wavering. "Yes, compromised by stupidity." Evelyn snapped. "Do it. I will authorize the security alert from my device in 5 minutes." She hung up and quickly tapped out a text message to Deborah Lane. Her only true ally left on the board. Do not say a word. Emergency meeting the morning after New Year's. I am taking the wheel back. Be ready. With the cold efficiency of a forensic investigator. Evelyn used her phone to photograph every document on the desk. She captured the Benton Care logo, the stock dilution draft, and finally, the email where her son called her a figurehead. She checked the clarity of each image, ensuring every word was legible. These were not just pictures, they were ammunition. She arranged the papers exactly as she had found them, turning off the lamp. The darkness rushed back in, but she no longer felt lost in it. She felt dangerous. Evelyn walked back to the dining room. The air was warm and smelled of roast duck and expensive wine. Ryan was standing at the head of the table, his glass raised, basking in the adoration of his in-laws. He looked up as she entered, offering a dismissive, tight-lipped smile. "Everything okay, Mum?" "You were gone a while," he said, barely looking at her. "Just old age, Ryan," Evelyn replied smoothly, her voice light and unthreatening. She picked up her own glass of water, the crystal cool against her fingertips. "I was just thinking about how proud your father would be of how ambitious you have become." "To the future," Ryan shouted, clinking glasses with Mr. Benton. "Yes," Evelyn whispered, taking a sip. Her eyes locked on her son's flushed, triumphant face. "To the future." She sat down on her folding chair, watching him sit in the seat of honor. He thought he had successfully pushed her out of that chair tonight. He had no idea that while he was drinking wine, she had just sawed off the legs of the table. "You have removed me from this seat tonight," she thought, the internal monologue sounding like a judge reading a verdict. "So I will remove you from my entire life and from everything you think you are about to inherit." The automatic doors of the Valoria North Star Trust headquarters slid open at 9 o'clock sharp. Ryan strode into the lobby, his Italian leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the polished granite. He adjusted his silk tie, feeling the invincibility that came with the impending Benton deal. He nodded at the security guard, expecting the usual deferential salute. But the man looked away, his face unreadable. Ryan ignored it. By noon, the company would practically belong to his father-in-law, and his mother would be nothing more than a footnote in the annual report. He pushed open the double doors to the boardroom, expecting it to be empty until the 10 o'clock meeting. Instead, the room was full. Evelyn sat at the head of the table. She was not wearing the soft, knitted cardigans she wore at home. She was dressed in a charcoal suit that was 10 years old but pressed to a razor's edge. Harper Rhodes sat to her right, and Miguel Alvarez sat to her left, his fingers hovering over a laptop. Mom, Ryan asked, his confident smile faltering. "What are you doing here? The meeting isn't for an hour." "Sit down." "Ryan," Evelyn said. Her voice lacked any maternal warmth. It was the voice of the woman who had scrubbed floors to build an empire. Ryan hesitated, then took the seat at the opposite end. "Look, if this is about the branding change, we can discuss it later. Charles is coming in." "Charles Benton is not coming in," Harper interrupted, sliding a thick file across the mahogany table. "We have reviewed your proposal for Benton Care residences. We have also reviewed your attempt to restructure the voting shares without board approval." "That was just a draft," Ryan stammered, his face flushing. "I was going to present it today." "It is a breach of fiduciary duty," Evelyn stated, her eyes locking onto his. "Clause 14 of the corporate charter The one I wrote before you were even in high school. You attempted to sell the controlling interest of this family to a competitor for personal gain. It's a merger, Ryan shouted, slamming his hand on the table. It's business. You don't understand modern business. I understand betrayal, Evelyn replied calmly. She nodded to Miguel. Miguel hit a single key on his laptop. Simultaneously, Ryan's phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. And again. What did you do? Ryan demanded, looking at his screen. His corporate email account had just logged him out. As of this morning, the board has voted to suspend you from the position of CEO, effective immediately. Evelyn announced, Your signing authority is revoked. Your company credit cards are frozen. Your access to the internal trading platform has been terminated. You can't do that, Ryan gasped, his voice trembling. I am the face of this company. You were a mask, Evelyn said, and I just took it off. Ryan fumbled with his phone, his fingers shaking as he tried to dial Charles Benton, before he could connect. A notification from the bank flashed across his screen. He swiped it open. It was a priority alert. Mr. Carter, this is to notify you that the personal guarantee on your primary residence mortgage and your 3 vehicle leases has been withdrawn by the guarantor, Mrs. Evelyn Carter. The outstanding balance of $4 million is now due in full within 30 days. Mum? Ryan whispered, the blood draining from his face. The house. Lily loves that house. Then perhaps Lily should pay for it, Evelyn said, watching him without blinking, miles away, in the marble foyer of the house in question. Lily stared at her iPad in horror. Emails were flooding her inbox, not invitations to galas, but automated warnings from the bank, the leasing agency, and the private school where their children were enrolled. Every aspect of their lavish life had been underwritten by Evelyn's silent signature. Now, the safety net was gone, and the ground was rushing up to meet them. Back in the boardroom, Ryan's phone finally rang. He answered it desperately. Charles. Thank God. Listen, there is a misunderstanding here, Ryan. Charles Benton's voice came through the speaker, cold and metallic. I just received an internal memo from your board secretary. It says you are under investigation for corporate malfeasance. It's just my mother being difficult. I can fix this. I don't do business with unstable families. Ryan, Charles said. And I certainly don't merge my assets with a CEO who doesn't even control his own bank accounts. The deal is off. Do not contact me until you have cleaned up your mess. The line went dead. Ryan lowered the phone slowly, looking at the woman at the end of the table. He looked for pity. He looked for the mother who used to bake him lopsided birthday cakes. She was not there. Evelyn stood up. She took a fountain pen from her pocket, the cheap plastic one she had used since nursing school, and signed the document Harper placed in front of her. What is that? Ryan asked, his voice cracking. Are you firing me? No, Evelyn said, capping the pen. I am resigning. I am stepping down as chairwoman. Ryan blinked, a flicker of hope sparking in his eyes. You're leaving. I have just transferred 100% of my voting shares and assets into a new entity. Evelyn continued, picking up her old leather handbag. The Northwind Legacy Foundation. It is an irrevocable trust with strict conduct clauses. Since I am no longer the owner, and you have been suspended by the board, you have nothing left to inherit. She walked past him. She did not touch his shoulder. She did not smooth his hair. At the glass doors of the entrance, Evelyn paused. She looked up at the silver letters of the logo Valoria North Star Trust, the name she had built to honor a dead husband and support a living son. "Goodbye, Ryan," she whispered to the empty air. "From tomorrow, only the Northwind Legacy Foundation remains, and you are not in it." The silence in the small suburban bungalow was absolute. This was the only property Evelyn owned that did not have Ryan's signature entangled in its deed. And tonight, it felt less like a home and more like a waiting room. She moved through the hallway with the methodical slowness of a woman dismantling a bomb. She was not just cleaning, she was curating an exit. She sorted photographs into 3 distinct piles on the floor: keep, burn, and leave. 2 days later, she met Harper Rhodes at a coffee shop on the edge of town, far from the business district where they might be recognized. Harper slid a thick manila envelope across the scratched wooden table. "This is the nuclear option," Harper said. Her voice lowered to a whisper. "Identity dissolution. A legal name change, a change of state residency, and a tiered trust structure that makes you invisible to any private investigator Ryan might hire. You become a ghost." Evelyn stared at the envelope, her hand hovering over it. "It seems extreme. He is my son. To vanish completely." Harper leaned forward, her eyes hard and unyielding. "Evelyn, look at me. Does Ryan treat you like a mother? Or does he treat you like a living line of credit?" Evelyn opened her mouth to defend him, but the words turned to ash in her throat. She closed her mouth and looked down at her tea. The silence stretched between them for a long time. "Do it," Evelyn whispered. She went home to write the final letter. It was not a tearful goodbye. It was a ledger. She sat at her old oak desk and wrote down the dates of the birthdays he had missed, the loans he had coerced her into signing, and the moment he removed her title. She did not ask for forgiveness. She simply stated facts. She sealed the envelope and wrote Ryan on the front, leaving it on the kitchen counter next to her keys. The following morning, Evelyn walked into the county courthouse. When she walked out an hour later, Evelyn Carter was gone. In her place stood Nora Blake. She went straight to a salon in a strip mall she had never visited before. "Cut it off," she told the stylist, pulling at her silver bun. "All of it. Short and practical. Dye it a darker grey. I want to look invisible." When she looked in the mirror an hour later, a stranger with a sharp pixie cut and a denim jacket looked back. She touched her cheek, feeling a strange mixture of grief and liberation. She sold the bungalow to a cash buyer within 3 days. The proceeds, totaling $450,000, were transferred immediately into the Northwind Legacy Foundation. Evelyn attached a strict rider to the funds. The money was exclusively for geriatric care grants and educational scholarships. She added a specific clause for her grandchildren. They could receive full tuition, but only if they applied on their own merit, without knowing the source of the funds. Nora Blake chose a destination on a map she had never pinned before. It was a small coastal town near Savannah, Georgia. It was a place where nobody knew what Valoria North Star Trust was. She rented a garage apartment for $1,200 a month and applied for a part-time job at a local community center organizing books. The night before her flight, she drove her rental car to Ryan's neighborhood. It was raining heavily. She parked down the street, hidden by the shadows of the oak trees. Through the large, illuminated bay window of the mansion she had almost paid for, she saw them. Ryan was pacing back and forth, waving his arms. Lily was sitting at the dining table with her head in her hands. They were arguing. Even through the glass, she could see the tension, the fear of a lifestyle collapsing. Suddenly, her granddaughter Emma appeared at the window, looking out into the wet dark. Evelyn felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She wanted to run to the door. She wanted to fix it one last time. No, she whispered to the empty car, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Not this time. She put the car in gear and drove away just as Emma's gaze swept over the spot where she had been. At 5 o'clock the next morning, she boarded a plane with a single suitcase and a burner phone that had 0 contacts saved in it. Her entire past life, 40 years of struggle and success, was compressed onto a silver USB drive locked in a vault in Harper's office. That evening, as the sun set over the marshlands of Georgia, Evelyn Carter was officially dead in every file that mattered. And in a quiet room, smelling of salt air, Nora Blake began the terrifying task of learning how to exist in a world where no one would ever call her mom again. The years unfolded not in fiscal quarters or annual reports, but in the rhythm of the tides that washed against the Georgia coastline. Nora Blake pedaled her second-hand bicycle to the community center every morning at 7 o'clock, the salty air stinging her cheeks in a way that made her feel alive. She was no longer the woman in the power suit. She was the woman in the knitted cardigan who taught literacy classes to elderly fishermen and baked cinnamon rolls for the monthly fundraisers. To the town, she was simply Ms. Nora, a quiet widow with a sharp wit and a mysterious past. Her apartment was a single room above a bakery, filled with the scent of yeast and the sound of the ocean. It was small, costing only $800 a month, but it was hers. She lived simply on her meager teacher's pension and a tiny, regulated withdrawal from a clean account she had separated from the Carter Empire years ago. In the evenings, she would sit by her window, listening to the faint jazz music drifting up from the bar down the street, feeling a peace she had never known in the boardrooms of Houston. However, she had not severed every tie. Her connection to her past life arrived twice a year in a plain, unmarked envelope from the Northwind Legacy Foundation. These were anonymous status reports on the scholarship recipients. Nora would lock her door, put on her reading glasses, and trace the names Emma Carter and Cole Carter with a trembling finger. They had applied for financial aid. The reports noted that they qualified due to significant changes in family financial status. It broke her heart to know they were struggling, but it filled her with a fierce pride to see their grades. Emma was studying sociology. Cole was captain of his debate team. Nora watched them grow up through photocopied transcripts and redacted medical receipts. She saw their triumphs and their illnesses, but she could never send a card or make a soup. "You are doing so well," she would whisper to the papers, her voice cracking in the empty room. "Just keep going. Don't let him pull you down." Ryan appeared in her life only as a cautionary tale in the business section of the newspaper, which she read at the public library. She saw the headlines. Ryan Carter sued for breach of contract. Ryan Carter files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy after failed venture. Ryan Carter relocates to Arizona. Every article confirmed what she had known the night she left. Without her standing behind him to prop him up, he was collapsing under his own weight. She did not feel a rush of victory. Instead, she felt the heavy, somber satisfaction of a teacher watching a student finally face the consequences of cheating on a test. He was learning the hard way that heritage was something you built, not something you spent. One afternoon, a letter was forwarded to her through the Blind Trust. It was a handwritten note from Emma, thanking the anonymous donors for funding her volunteer trip to Peru. "I don't know who you are," the letter read, "but my father told me we were on our own. You proved him wrong, I promise. I promise I will pay this forward someday." Nora read the letter until the ink blurred behind her tears. She sat on her small balcony, pressing the paper to her chest. She cried silently, the salt of her tears mixing with the salt of the sea air. She made a vow then and there that she would always protect the children. They would never pay for the sins of their father. The townspeople often asked about her solitude. During the holiday potluck at the centre, the director, a kind woman named Sarah, sat beside her. "Ms. Nora, surely you have family somewhere. It is Christmas. Why doesn't anyone visit?" Nora smiled, a sad but genuine expression that reached her eyes. "I had a family once," she said softly. "But life gets complicated. Now, I have all of you. That is enough for me." Time continued to march forward. Nora's prescription glasses became thicker, and her walk to the beach became slower. Her hair turned completely white, but her mind remained as sharp as a diamond. She did not forget. She simply waited. She watched the horizon with the patience of someone who knew the end of the story before it was written. One evening, staring out at the dark water, she realized the anger that had fueled her departure had quietly evaporated. It was replaced by clarity. Every year that passes, she thought, listening to the waves crash, I feel less like the woman who was abandoned. I see clearly now that I am the one who walked away. I left him to live with the empty space he created, while I learned how to fill mine. The calendar on the wall of the cramped apartment in Denver marked the passage of 19 years since that fateful Christmas Eve. But for Ryan, time was measured in losses. He was nearly 50 years old now, and the mirror reflected a man he barely recognized. His hair was thinning and grey, his face lined with the stress of 1,000 missed quotas. He worked for a mid-tier brokerage firm, spending his days cold-calling people who hung up on him, a humiliating fall from the executive suite he had once occupied. His marriage to Lily was a distant, bitter memory. It had dissolved years ago, eroding under the pressure of bankruptcy and his constant, vitriolic blame-shifting. He could still hear her final words before she walked out the door with her suitcases. "You are poison." "Ryan," she had said, her voice trembling with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You didn't just lose your mother. You lost your moral compass. And I don't want to be lost with you anymore." Even his children, Emma and Cole, were strangers to him. They were adults now, living their own lives on the coast. They kept a polite, icy distance, exhausted by years of hearing him rant about how his mother had abandoned them to poverty. They stopped visiting when they realized he only wanted to use them as an audience for his grievances. Ryan rubbed his chest. A dull, throbbing ache had been settling there for months. He told himself it was just indigestion, but deep down he knew it was the stress. His insurance was terrible. The deductibles high enough to bankrupt him all over again. As the pain flared, a desperate thought took root in his mind. Evelyn. She had to be somewhere. She couldn't have spent everything. Maybe there was a house, a secret account, something he could claim as her only son. He scraped together enough money for a flight back to Houston. He walked into the glass tower that used to be Valoria North Star Trust, now branded with the logo of a massive international conglomerate. He approached the reception desk, flashing a smile that used to charm investors but now looked desperate. "I am looking for information on Evelyn Carter," Ryan said. "She was the chairwoman here about 20 years ago." The young receptionist typed onto her keyboard, her face blank. "I am sorry, sir. There is no one by that name in our current or historical active system. This company was acquired 15 years ago. All prior personnel files were archived or purged." Ryan did not give up. He went to the courthouse, the county clerk, and the bank. He chased ghosts through dusty ledgers and digital archives. Every path led to the same dead end, the Northwind Legacy Foundation. The records listed the founder simply as anonymous, with a notation that the individual was deceased. The trust is irrevocable. A clerk at the records office told him, peering over her glasses. The founder passed away legally nearly 2 decades ago. All assets were distributed according to a sealed will. There is no recourse for family members. He drove a rental car to the old bungalow in the suburbs, the one house Evelyn had kept separate from his business deals. He stood on the sidewalk, watching a strange family eat dinner in the kitchen where his mother used to count coupons. He knocked on the door. The owner, a man in his 30s, looked at him with suspicion. "We bought this place cash almost 20 years ago," the man said, holding the door halfway closed. "The lady was in a hurry. She sold it below market value just to move fast. I don't know where she went. We never heard from her again." Desperate and running out of funds, Ryan hired a cheap private investigator named Miller. Miller smelled of stale tobacco and cheap cologne, but he was thorough. 2 weeks later, they met in a diner. Miller slid a thin file across the table. "Save your money, pal," Miller said, shaking his head. "According to every database I can access, Evelyn Carter is a ghost. She is dead on paper. Social Security, tax records, everything stops 19 years ago. Her assets went into a charity lockbox. You have no legal standing. You get nothing." That night, Ryan sat on the edge of his motel bed with a bottle of cheap whiskey. He poured a glass and stared at the wall. For the first time in years, the anger drained away, leaving only a hollow, aching grief. He wasn't crying because he was broke. He was crying because the image of Evelyn sitting on that folding chair, humiliated and alone while he toasted his in-laws, flooded his mind. He realized with a terrifying clarity that he had been the one to cut the cord. Suddenly, the dull ache in his chest exploded into a crushing pressure. He gasped, dropping the glass. It shattered on the floor. His left arm went numb. He fumbled for his phone, his vision blurring, and managed to dial emergency services before collapsing onto the carpet. He woke up hours later in a hospital bed, the steady beep of a monitor the only sound in the room. He was alive. A nurse checked his vitals, her expression kind but busy. "You are lucky, Mr. Carter," she said. "It was a minor myocardial infarction. You need rest." Ryan looked around the room. It was not a private suite. It was a community ward for patients with limited coverage. His eyes drifted to a large, colourful banner hanging on the far wall, proudly announcing the sponsors of the Indigent Care Programme. This unit is funded and maintained by a generous annual grant from the Northwind Legacy Foundation. Ryan stared at the name he had cursed for hiding his inheritance, the name he had despised for cutting him off. He lay back on the pillow, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes, realizing that the mother he had tried to erase was the only reason he was breathing. The glow of the laptop screen seemed to be the only light in the entire world. Nora Blake sat in her small apartment above the bakery, her cup of herbal tea growing cold and forgotten. She was 78 years old now, and her hands usually had a steady, practiced rhythm to them. But tonight they hovered over the trackpad, frozen. The email from the Northwind Legacy Foundation Board of Directors remained open in front of her. It was a standard approval request for a high-cost medical grant. But the name on the beneficiary line screamed at her across the silence of nearly 2 decades. Patient name, Ryan Carter. The board had flagged it because of the semantic match to the original donor records, asking for her guidance on this unusual anomaly. Nora felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze coming through her window. It felt as though someone had taken a shovel and dug up a grave she had packed down with earth 18 years ago. She forced herself to breathe, clicking open the detailed attachment. The report was clinical and devastating. The patient was suffering from severe coronary artery blockage and required immediate bypass surgery. Under the financial assessment section, the words were stark uninsured, significant outstanding debt, low income bracket. There was a handwritten note scanned at the bottom of the page from the hospital caseworker. It read, "Patient's 2 adult children, Emma and Cole, have been in contact. They are distressed and have attempted to pool resources, but they do not have the $40,000 required for the procedure." Nora leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. The image of the folding chair she sat on that final Christmas Eve flashed behind her eyelids. She heard Ryan's voice, dismissive and arrogant, telling her she was just a figurehead. She counted the years in her head. 20 Christmases without a phone call. 20 Mother's Days without a single card. He had not just forgotten her. He had actively erased her to build a kingdom that had now crumbled into dust. Let him pay for it himself, she whispered to the empty room, her voice trembling with a flash of old anger. He wanted to be the man in charge. Let him handle it. But then the names from the bottom of the file floated back to her. Emma and Cole. She imagined them standing in a sterile hospital hallway, smelling of antiseptic and fear. They were innocent. They had never asked for a father who valued status over family, and they had never asked for a grandmother who had to vanish to save herself. If Ryan died because he was poor, that guilt would settle on Emma and Cole's shoulders like a heavy stone. They would spend the rest of their lives wondering if they could have done more, if they should have sold their cars or taken out loans they could not afford. Nora opened her eyes and looked at the ocean outside her window. It was dark, the waves invisible but audible as they crashed against the shore. "I am not doing this for you, Ryan," she said, her voice steeling itself. "I am not saving the son who threw me away. I am saving 2 children from the belief that money is more important than life. A lesson you never learned." She turned back to the keyboard and began to type her reply to the board. Her instructions were precise. The foundation would cover 100% of the medical expenses, including post-operative care. However, the anonymity clause was to be absolute. The donor was to remain nameless. There would be no contact information provided, no address for thank you notes, and no channel for communication. She hit send. Her finger lingered on the key, shaking slightly. It was done. She had just saved the life of the man who had destroyed hers, and he would never know it. Nora stood up and walked out onto her small balcony. The wind whipped at her white hair. She realized then that the clean break she thought she had made years ago was a myth. The cord between a mother and child could be stretched across states, hidden under new names, and buried under silence. But it could never be fully severed. It had simply bypassed Ryan and anchored itself to his children. An hour later, a second email chimed. It was a confirmation from the hospital liaison, expressing profound gratitude. Attached was a low-resolution photo taken in the recovery ward, likely sent to the foundation to show the human impact of the grant. Nora enlarged the image. It was blurry. Ryan lay in a hospital bed, looking pale and older than she could have imagined, hooked up to tubes and wires. But it was not his face she looked at. Sitting on either side of the bed, holding his limp hands, were Emma and Cole. Their heads were bowed, their postures exhausted but relieved. Nora reached out and touched the cold glass of the screen. She carefully avoided the figure in the bed. Her thumb brushed against Emma's cheek and then Cole's hand. "You are safe now," she whispered, tears finally spilling over. "He is still your father, and I won't let you lose him just yet." The automatic doors of the Coastal Recovery Centre slid open with a soft hiss. It was a cruel twist of fate that the facility Ryan had been transferred to was one of the flagship projects of the Northwind Legacy Foundation. Nora Blake walked into the lobby, her volunteer badge pinned to her simple knit cardigan. She was there, ostensibly as a representative of the donor group, to offer encouragement to the patients. But her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She held a clipboard in her hands, her knuckles white as she scanned the list of patients in the cardiac recovery wing. Halfway down the page, there it was, Ryan Carter. Beside his name was a clinical note typed in bold patient exhibits, signs of severe depression, history of financial stress and unresolved family trauma. Needs engagement. Nora took a deep breath, adjusting her thick prescription glasses. She pushed the small cart filled with water bottles and towels toward the rehabilitation lounge. The room was filled with the soft whirring of stationary bikes and the murmur of nurses, but her eyes went instantly to the figure sitting alone in the corner near the window. He looked older than his 49 years. His hair was thinning and grey, and his shoulders were slumped forward, as if they were carrying an invisible weight. He was staring at his hands, completely motionless. Nora felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She gripped the handle of the cart to keep from falling. This was the boy she had carried, the man she had built an empire for. And now, the stranger she had saved. She forced her feet to move. She parked the cart a few feet away and picked up a bottle of water. "You look like you could use this," Nora said, her voice dropping to a register she rarely used, rougher and lower than the motherly tone she used to have. Ryan looked up. His eyes were dull, lacking the sharp arrogance of the past. He looked at her, really looked at her, but saw only an old woman with short white hair and a volunteer badge. There was no flicker of recognition. "Thanks," Ryan said, taking the bottle. His hand trembled slightly. I was just thinking. Thinking can be dangerous in a place like this," Nora replied, pulling up a plastic chair to sit at a polite distance. "The doctors say you need to focus on the future, not the past." Ryan let out a short, dry laugh that sounded like cracking wood. "The future, I don't have much of one. And the past. Well, that is where I live mostly." "Regrets?" Nora asked, the word tasting like iron in her mouth. "You could say that," Ryan said, twisting the cap of the bottle without opening it. "I had a mother once. She built everything for me. Companies, houses, a reputation. And I treated her like she was an employee I could fire. Nora sat very still. She dug her fingernails into her palms. Did you ever try to find her? To make amends? Ryan sighed, a long, rattling sound from his damaged chest. I tried. About 6 months ago, when I realized I was dying. I went back to Houston. I hired a detective. But on paper, she has been dead for nearly 20 years. No address, no tax records, nothing. He paused, looking out the window at the parking lot. But that isn't the worst part. What is Nora whispered, afraid that if she spoke louder, her voice would crack back into Evelyn's. The worst part is that she didn't just die on paper, Ryan said, his voice thickening with tears he refused to shed. She died to me the night I pushed her out. I thought I was free. I thought I was winning. But I was just digging a hole. And now that I want to say I'm sorry, there is nobody to hear it. I am talking to a ghost every night. Nora looked at his profile. She saw the lines of pain around his mouth. She saw the terrifying vulnerability of a man who had lost his armor. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to reach out, to touch his arm, to say, I am here. Ryan, I am right here. But she stayed frozen. She remained Ms. Nora, the volunteer. Maybe, Nora said slowly, choosing her words with agonizing care. Maybe she found peace. And maybe, knowing that you are finally sorry would be enough for her, wherever she is. Ryan looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed. Do you really believe that? Or are you just saying it because it is your job to be nice to the dying guys? I believe, Nora said, standing up because she could not bear the suffocation of the moment for 1 second longer, that mothers never truly stop loving their children, even when they have to leave them to save themselves. She turned the cart around before he could see the single tear that escaped her control and tracked through the wrinkles on her cheek. She walked out of the lounge without looking back, leaving her son sitting with his water bottle and his ghosts. That night, the wind from the ocean rattled the window pane of her small apartment. Nora sat at her kitchen table. In front of her lay a battered metal box she had kept locked for 2 decades. She took out the yellowing passport of Evelyn Carter and placed it on the table. Next to it, she laid down the crisp, plastic identification card of Nora Blake. She looked from one name to the other. One was a mother who had been erased. The other was a woman who had survived. He is sorry, she whispered to the empty room. He is truly sorry. She touched the photo of Evelyn Carter. For the first time in years, the face in the picture didn't look like a victim. It looked like a woman waiting for permission to exist again. But as the wind howled outside, Nora wasn't sure if she was ready to open that door, or if the punishment she had designed had become a prison for them both. Nora sat across from Harper Rhodes in the quiet corner of the hotel lobby, the final documents resting between them on the glass table. Harper looked older too, her hair now a steel grey, but her eyes were still sharp with legal caution. If you reveal yourself now, Harper warned, her voice low, you risk piercing the corporate veil we spent 20 years building. The foundation is bulletproof. But if Ryan can prove you have been manipulating it personally, it could get messy. He won't sue, Nora said, picking up the pen. He is a broken man. Harper. And I am not doing this to negotiate. She signed the amendment to the North Wind Legacy Foundation Charter with a steady hand. It was her final strategic move. The new clause was explicit. Ryan Carter was permanently disqualified from any trustee position or direct inheritance. Upon Nora's death, the control of the multi-million-dollar fund would bypass him entirely and land in the hands of Emma and Cole. It was a stroke of justice that felt both cruel and necessary. Ryan would survive because of her money, but the power he had craved would belong to the children he had neglected. 2 days later, Nora arranged a private session in the small consultation room at the recovery center. The staff agreed readily, trusting the gentle volunteer who had shown such rapport with the patients. When Ryan walked in, he looked better than before, but his eyes were still haunted. He sat opposite her, wringing his hands. "They said you wanted to share a story with me," Ryan said politely. "I do," Nora replied. She did not look away this time. Her gaze was intense. "It is a story about a woman who built a kingdom out of nothing. She scrubbed floors and mortgages her soul so her son could wear a suit and forget where he came from. And when that son decided she was an embarrassment, he erased her from the company history." Ryan froze. The color drained from his face. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, visible through his thin shirt. "Then," Nora continued, her voice steady and unyielding, "that son got sick. He was dying. And the only reason he is breathing today is because the ghost of the mother he killed paid his bill." Ryan stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He was trembling. Who are you?" How do you know that Nora did not answer? Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in velvet. She placed it on the table and slid it toward him. It was an antique gold watch. Ryan reached for it with shaking fingers. He recognized the scratches on the casing. He clicked it open. Inside, the inscription was still legible, etched there 40 years ago. "For my boy who promised never to forget me. Mom." The watch slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the table. Ryan looked at the woman with the short white hair and the cheap cardigan, and the veil finally lifted. "Mom," he whispered, the word sounding foreign and broken on his tongue. "Mom, is it really you? I am Nora Blake," she said softly. "Evelyn Carter ceased to exist the night she walked out of your house with nothing but a suitcase." Ryan fell to his knees beside the table. He reached out to grab her hand, crying openly now. "I am so sorry. Mom, I am so sorry. I lost everything. I was stupid. Please. Please. Just give me a chance to fix this. I will do anything." Nora looked at his hand, then at his weeping face. She felt a phantom ache in her chest, the ghost of the love she had once held so fiercely, but she did not pull him into an embrace. She did not offer him a tissue. "You had a chance." "Ryan," she said, her voice filled with a terrible, final sadness. "You had a chance every day for 20 years. You had a chance when I sat on that folding chair in your kitchen while you toasted your new family. You pushed that chair away. I can change." He sobbed. "We can start over." "We cannot," Nora said, standing up. She looked down at him, not with hatred, but with the distant pity of a stranger. "You forgot me on purpose. I stayed away on purpose. If I had come back sooner, you would have learned nothing. You would have thought people are disposable. Now the price has been paid. You lost your mother. But I found myself. The rest of your life is your choice. And it has nothing to do with me. Mom!" "Please," Ryan begged, reaching for the hem of her cardigan. Nora stepped back, out of his reach. She placed a hand on his shoulder for a brief second, a touch that was both a blessing and a goodbye. "Be a father to Emma and Cole," she said. "That is the only inheritance you have left." She turned and walked out of the room. She did not look back at the man sobbing on the floor. She walked through the lobby, past the reception desk, and out into the bright, blinding afternoon sun. The salt air of the ocean hit her face. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs. She was not Evelyn Carter anymore. She was Nora Blake, and she had a book club to attend at 6 o'clock. She walked toward her car, leaving the past behind the sliding glass doors, never to return. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It really was a journey. Wasn't it? Drop a comment down below and let me know where you're tuning in from. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Nora's decision. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.